In the fiery skies of the 1930, as militarism surged and great powers plunged into an arms race, Japan understood that if it wished to challenge the United States Navy in the Pacific, it needed an entirely new trump card. By withdrawing from international naval treaties, Tokyo cast aside all limits on displacement and firepower, paving the way for an ambition to build an unprecedented battleship. From that ambition, Yamato was born a colossal warship carrying 9 460mm main guns with a range of more than 40 kilometers, the largest naval guns ever mounted on a surface vessel. To the Japanese naval leadership, Yamato was not merely a battleship. It was a monster of the seas, expected to tip the balance of power, compensate for Japan's massive industrial gap with the United States, and stand as a symbol of the nation's determination to wage total naval war. At that time, even though Japan's industrial base was only a fraction of America's enormous manufacturing power, strategic planners in Tokyo remained steadfast in the belief of fewer but far more powerful. Every new battleship had to significantly outperform its counterpart across the Pacific. After withdrawing from the Washington Naval Treaty in 1934, the Imperial Japanese Navy immediately launched a new battleship design program free from any restrictions on displacement or gun caliber. Between 1934 and 1936, more than 20 design proposals were studied, featuring main guns from 410mm to 460mm, various armor schemes, and multiple propulsion configurations, before the final blueprint was approved by Rear Admiral Fukuda Keiji in March 1937. Even on paper, the Yamato project already embodied a silent clash between old naval thinking and the rapidly changing landscape of military technology. The Japanese General Staff still clung tightly to the Kantai-Kessen Doctrine, the decisive fleet battle, which held that a single, overwhelming clash between heavy battleships would determine the outcome of a naval war. This belief drove Japan's leaders to place absolute faith in creating a ship so powerful that the enemy could not hope to resist, rather than spreading resources across hundreds of smaller vessels and carriers as the United States did. Under this design philosophy, the Yamato class would possess a standard displacement of roughly 64,000 tons, nearly 72,800 tons, fully loaded and mount 9 460mm. 45 Type 94 guns, housed in 3 triple turrets, forming a concentrated battery worthy of the term super battleship. That obsession created an atmosphere of near absolute secrecy around the project. The Kure shipyard was concealed beneath massive tarps and camouflage nets, and engineers were forbidden from describing the ship's true dimensions even to their own families. Many detailed blueprints were deliberately destroyed at the end of the war. To the outside world and even to American intelligence agents, Yamato was merely a giant phantom, mentioned only through scattered rumors of a battleship armed with 18-inch guns, impressive speed, and a displacement far beyond any conventional standard. Japan originally intended to build 5 Yamato-class ships, but in the end only 2 battleships, Yamato and Musashi, and a third hull converted into the aircraft carrier Shinano were completed. Yamato was laid down in 1937, launched in 1940, and commissioned just as Japan opened the war. Musashi followed in 1942, and Shinano, launched in 1944 as an armored carrier, built on a Yamato-class hull, managed to operate for only 9 days before being sunk by an American submarine during her trial voyage. The entire structure of the Yamato class, 2 massive surface flagships, and 1 converted carrier reflected Japan's final, desperate attempt to assemble a naval backbone capable of confronting the industrial war machine of the United States. The hull stretched more than 260 meters, nearly 3 football fields end-to-end, with a full load displacement of roughly 70,000 tons, heavier than a literal floating city. Beneath that steel exterior were 4 steam turbine units, producing around 150,000 horsepower, enough to push this colossal mass through the water at about 27 knots, roughly 50 kilometers per hour. This was far from slow. For a battleship with such heavy armor and such a massive hull, it was an impressive speed, allowing Yamato to keep pace with the fleet. Surrounding this mobile fortress were more than 3,000 people, from sailors and gunners to machinists and engineers, forming an operating system as complex as a gigantic living organism. Beneath that thick steel exterior lay an armor scheme of remarkable sophistication. Japan did not fully adopt the American-style all-or-nothing armor philosophy, instead developing a hybrid system of its own. Yamato's main belt was sloped at about 20 degrees, increasing its effective resistance against long-range armor-piercing shells. The citadel, the ship's vital core, was wrapped in a combination of sloped and vertical armor plates, forming a defensive shell the Japanese believed no naval gun in the world could penetrate at normal combat ranges. Yet here lay the irony. While Yamato was nearly immune to battleship gunfire, its torpedo defense was not as strong as Japan had hoped. The layered anti-flooding compartments were effective in theory, but prioritizing armor for the sides and turrets meant the lower hull and blast-absorbing structures lacked enough cushion to withstand the improved American torpedoes. This explains why, during Operation Tengo, only a few well-placed torpedo strikes were enough to cause severe listing and rob the ship of any ability to save herself. At the heart of Yamato were her 9 46cm, 45 Type 94 guns, the largest naval artillery ever mounted on a warship. Each barrel was a colossal piece of steel weighing hundreds of tons, capable of launching a shell heavier than a small car to a distance of more than 40 kilometers. In theory, Yamato could open fire on an enemy beyond the horizon, while appearing only as a faint blur on the sea herself. When all 3 turrets fired simultaneously, 9 pillars of flame erupted at once. The surrounding waters trembled, and the deck seemed to recoil under the tremendous shock, an experience remembered by every witness with the same impression. Yamato did not fire like a ship, but like an entire line of coastal fortresses unleashing a salvo together. But this immense firepower came with a fire control system already outdated by the time the ship was launched. The Japanese Navy lacked the highly accurate, long-range fire control radar employed by American battleships. Much of Yamato's targeting still relied on optical sights and large rangefinders, which performed poorly in fog, rain, or when aircraft interfered. At ideal distances, Yamato could achieve frightening accuracy. But in the chaotic real-world combat of the Pacific, that advantage often existed only in theory. What elevated Yamato to legendary status was the sheer weight of armor and defensive systems that made her appear less like a ship and more like a seaborne fortress. As American air attacks intensified, the Japanese continued, planting guns onto every available space. In addition to medium-caliber 155mm and 127mm guns for surface and anti-air duties, the decks gradually turned into a forest of barrels, bristling with hundreds of 25mm anti-aircraft guns pointed skyward, an earnest hope that a dense enough wall of fire could tear apart the incoming waves of attacking. The aircraft, when weighed against contemporary rivals such as the American Iowa class, Yamato was clearly built according to the philosophy of bigger, thicker, heavier. Yamato's 46cm guns delivered superior stopping power and armor penetration, while its thick armor was optimized for decisive long-range gunnery duels. The American battleships, however, held the advantage in speed and versatility. The Iowa class was lighter, several knots faster, and equipped with radar, fire control, and anti-aircraft systems that were continually modernized. Even so, in the eyes of many Japanese officers, Yamato's durability and sheer brute strength were never in question had World War II unfolded according to the traditional vision of battleship versus battleship. Yamato would likely have been the most formidable heavyweight champion on any ocean. In theoretical terms, a one-on-one duel between Yamato and Iowa remains a popular subject of debate. But one thing is certain. In modern warfare, the ability to control engagement distance matters just as much as raw firepower. In doctrine and technology, Iowa represented the future. Yamato was the pinnacle of the past. In October 1944, as the American campaign to retake the Philippines reached its fiercest point, Yamato and Musashi spearheaded the Japanese center force under Admiral Takeo Kurita. It was a moment when Japan's leadership still believed these colossal battleships could shift the tide, even though the war had already turned in America's favor. But as soon as Kurita advanced into the Sibuyan Sea on October 24, the sky transformed into hell. Wave after wave of U.S. Navy airstrikes descended with unprecedented ferocity. Not the gunnery duel Yamato-class ships were designed to win, but an execution from the sky. Musashi, the stalwart younger brother of Yamato, was struck by dozens of bombs and torpedoes. The hull tore open in massive wounds, flooding compartments so quickly that all damage control efforts became futile. After absorbing at least 17 bombs and 19 torpedoes, Musashi capsized and sank into the Sibuyan depths at sunset, taking more than 1,000 crewmen with her. Yamato survived only because Kurita chose to withdraw and regroup his forces, but the psychological toll paid by the Japanese fleet was immeasurable. Just half a day later, on October 25, Yamato returned to battle, this time off Samar, where one of the most surreal engagements of the entire Pacific War unfolded. On the American side were only small escort carriers and a handful of destroyers fighting desperately. On the Japanese side stood battleships and heavy cruisers built for an all-out gunnery showdown. As the sun rose, Yamato fired her 460mm guns at real targets for the first time, and the effect was almost unreal. USS Gambier Bay was pierced and engulfed in flames before sinking. USS Johnston, revered by many American veterans as a symbol of heroism, was heavily damaged before being overwhelmed and lost. To the American pilots conducting the airstrikes, Yamato and Musashi were such bizarre, outsized targets that they defied belief. Reports described them as buildings moving across the sea, so large that they distorted the pilot's sense of speed. Some pilots even mistook Yamato for two ships fused together, her width and height exceeding anything that had ever appeared in the Pacific. In Washington, long before the battle, Yamato was often nicknamed the Ghost Battleship, because American intelligence had been unable to confirm her true size or capabilities for years. Even when reconnaissance photos showed the silhouette of a massive ship underway, many officers still assumed Japan simply could not have built a battleship that large. Only after the Sibuyan Sea strikes, when pilots reported extraordinarily heavy anti-air fire and an unusually huge target, did the US realize they were facing an entirely new generation of battleship, which was also the last of its kind. Yet despite Yamato inflicting serious damage on the enemy, Admiral Kurita unexpectedly ordered a withdrawal, partly fearing that he was sailing into a trap laid by American carriers, and partly because his formation was disorganized after the Sibuyan ordeal. The decision prevented Yamato from exploiting her advantage, and the battle off Samar, despite Yamato finally demonstrating the power she was built for, became another testament to the decline of the decisive battle doctrine. Even the most powerful battleship cannot prevail in a combat system for which it no longer belongs. By 1945, the Pacific War had become a desperate struggle for Japan. As Allied forces closed in on the home islands, the Japanese Naval General Staff placed its hopes on a near-suicidal move, Operation Ten-Go. Yamato, by then with almost no remaining strategic value, was ordered to sail to Okinawa, charge directly onto the shore, and become a stationary fortress against American forces. But that hope collapsed before the mission even began. American intelligence had already deciphered the plan, and Task Force 58 simply waited for Yamato to enter the kill zone. On the morning of the 7th of April 1945, hundreds of American bombers and fighters descended from multiple directions, attacking in relentless waves that broke every attempted defense. Torpedoes slammed into the port side, causing a severe list, while armor-piercing bombs shattered critical compartments, crippling the ship's damage control systems and fire suppression. After taking more than a dozen torpedoes and numerous bombs, the ship began to capsize and burn violently before the forward magazines detonated a towering column of fire, rising like a bitter full stop to Japan's grand naval ambitions. Barely 300 men survived out of nearly 2,700 officers and crew. The tragedy was that even as Yamato departed for Ten-Go, Japan had already accepted the mission as a one-way journey. The ship carried just enough fuel for a single outbound trip. Yamato's objective was not survival. It was simply to get as close to Okinawa as possible and serve as a giant shore gun. Inside the ship, more than 3,000 sailors lived in cramped, noisy quarters that constantly trembled from the massive engines. When the 460mm guns fired, the entire deck seemed to lift. The shock reverberated through the chest, making many feel as though their hearts were momentarily compressed. To the young gunners and engineers, Yamato was not just a warship. It was an entire closed world, a source of pride, yet shadowed by an unspoken fear as they understood they were serving aboard a vessel not built for the era into which it had been thrust. The fall of Yamato during Operation Tengo was not merely a military defeat. It was the symbol of the entire tragedy of Imperial Japan's naval strategy, placing faith in the brute strength of battleships in an era when the sky, not the sea, determined victory. From Sibuyan to Samar, and finally to Okinawa, events revealed a harsh truth. Although Yamato was the most powerful battleship ever built, in an age dominated by aircraft, it became nothing more than a gigantic target, unable to escape the scythe of death descending from above. In reality, even while Yamato was still on the drawing board, the revolution in naval aviation had already begun to reshape maritime warfare. Carriers and bombers could strike targets hundreds of kilometers away, far beyond the reach of any battleship guns. Meanwhile, Yamato's 460mm guns, despite their terrifying power, were still line-of-sight weapons with a range of only a few dozen kilometers. In theory, Yamato was built for the old-style, decisive fleet battle. Two navies lining up across the sea and exchanging gunfire until one side sank. But the Pacific War proved that when the enemy controlled the air, Yamato's sheer bulk meant it barely had time to raise its head before being struck from distances it could never respond to. The second limitation, less glamorous but even more brutal, was the industrial cost that Yamato imposed on a nation like Japan. To build a super battleship required immense quantities of steel, machinery, manpower, and time. With the same resources, the United States could produce multiple medium carriers, destroyers, escort ships, and aircraft flexible, easily replaced assets, far better suited to the new form of warfare. Japan, by contrast, with an industrial base only a fraction of America's, clung to the dream of a final showdown, using one or two super battleships. The result was that they shackled themselves to expensive, irreplaceable symbols, while lacking the capacity to replace losses in other vital categories. The third hull of the Yamato-class Shinano was a painful testament to the industrial exhaustion of Japan. Although converted into the largest armored aircraft carrier in the world at the time, Shinano entered service with its anti-flooding systems incomplete, an inadequately trained crew, and many watertight doors left open to allow equipment transport. Tens of thousands of tons of steel, years of labor, and Japan's remaining strategic hopes vanished before 4 torpedoes, not because the design was inherently flawed, but because the nation's industry no longer had the strength to finish the ship to proper standards. Ultimately, Japan's defeats were rooted in failures of strategic thinking and operational organization. The Americans had once drafted the Montana-class battleship to counter Yamato, yet they were the ones who shelved the design, having realized that the battleship-centric era was over. Japan recognized this too late. They continued treating Yamato as a sea god within a combat system that had already pivoted toward carriers, radar, long-range air power, and industrial attrition. In battle, Yamato often lacked adequate carrier escort, carried outdated radar, and its dense anti-aircraft armament was still ineffective. It was further crippled by fuel shortages and a thin protective screen. In its final engagements, the ship was trapped between 2 batteries of firepower. From above, waves of bombers and torpedo aircraft. From below, submarines and enemy surface forces. It was unable to reach the ranges where its 460mm guns were effective, and equally unable to escape the kill zone dominated by enemy aircraft. In other words, every strength Japan poured into Yamato could only be fully realized in a type of war that never actually occurred, while its weaknesses were exposed completely in the type of warfare that became the defining standard of the 20th century. The battleship Yamato was not only the culmination of Japan's military ambition, it was the final symbol of an era in which gods of the sea were believed to decide the fate of wars. When Yamato sank, it was not merely the loss of a warship, but a historical marker signaling the end of the battleship age. As military analyst Hanson W. Baldwin of the New York Times once observed, Yamato's destruction showed that the Americans had struck directly at Japan's vital weakness, both in the air and on the sea, by shifting their focus to long-range air power and carrier supremacy. Many American officers would later look back on that moment as a turning point. Admiral Chester Nimitz remarked that the Pacific War proved an enduring truth. Whoever controls the air, controls the sea. Yamato, for all its grandeur, was swept away by that very truth. However, Yamato's legacy did not disappear. The ship became a powerful cultural symbol in the minds of the Japanese and the wider world. The Yamato Museum in Kure preserves a large-scale reconstruction model. Films and literature reenact the great naval battles, and countless stories recall the loyalty and tragedy of the sailors who served aboard her. Today, Yamato is no longer remembered merely as a strategic mistake, but as a reminder of the limits of military power when it becomes detached from strategic context and the changing nature of an era. It is a lesson that all superweapons, no matter how powerful, must eventually face. Strength has value only when it fits the combat system it is meant to serve. Ultimately, the difference between Japan and the United States did not lie in any single ship, but in how each nation understood war. Japan dreamed of a perfect weapon that could change the course of the conflict in a single, decisive battle. The United States built a perfect assembly line, where every ship, every airfield, every aircraft was a component of a vast operational machine. Yamato was a testament to absolute physical might, but the Pacific War was decided by the ability to reproduce, resupply, and control the skies. In that era, the super battleship was no longer king of the oceans, but a monumental relic of a strategic mindset that had already outlived its time.